Picture in your mind a NASA engineer. What do you see? Starched white shirt with pins in the pocket, thin black tie, thick glasses. They might not look exactly like how you imagine.
You don't look like an engineer. You don't act like an engineer. You don't talk like an engineer.
NASA is known around the world for space launches, but there's a lot of work behind the scenes that most people never hear about.
You see the astronauts and they're the face of NASA. You don't see the process of how they got to being these superhuman people.
Today, I talk with Kate. She's a former NASA engineer, graduate of the National Test Pilot School, a marathon runner, and has grown a following of over 80,000 sharing her experiences as a STEM professional. No big deal.
Somebody let me fly a military jet with no pilot's license as a civilian. Where does that happen?
We talk about how the space launch industry is changing.
We need really smart, talented people in the commercial industry, but I think we also need them in government because it fills a really important need.
What being a test flight engineer is really like.
You have to be able to call somebody's baby ugly. Be honest about what you saw, even if it's not the answer that somebody else wants.
Some unsettling experiences at test pilot school.
If the pilot knows it's your first time, they're probably going to try to make you sick. So you're like, try not to barf.
And the secrets to success in this high-pressure world.
I don't know that people realize how important little things are in order to set yourself apart.
My name is Mitchell. This is the Aerpod, and I have one very important question for Kate. What exactly does a flight test engineer do?
Well, I like to say that we're kind of like the people who bring the whole flight test team together. So we're kind of, depending on where you work, it's kind of different everywhere of how they define what a flight test engineer is. But the basics is that you're kind of like a liaison between like the pilots, the mechanics, the discipline engineers, and you're basically, in a very broad way, you're in charge of like writing test plans, like planning and executing flight test of like aircraft and their systems. So yeah, you're really there to make sure that you prove out a system before it's released to the public or the military or whatever, and making sure that that system is safe for use. So
very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to later on. I want to get into test pilot school and the flight test engineering side, but maybe let's go back to the beginning. How did you find a passion or an interest in aviation and engineering in general?
Yeah, well, it actually started with an interest in space. So I grew up in North Dakota, and at night it's very dark. And so I used to stand out in the driveway with my dad. The first recollection of that is around like maybe second grade or, 10 years old or something like that. And I remember standing in the driveway, looking up at the dark night sky and just feeling so small in relation to the rest of our universe, and just like being so curious with how all of that works, and just realizing there was so much about the world that we don't understand, or the universe that we don't understand. And I wanted to be a part of humankind's journey to discovery. So through that, I guess I somehow found out about NASA, and I realized that I wanted to work there. And ultimately, I wanted to be an astronaut to help, be a part of humankind's journey to discovery. But I had heard that was really hard to do. So I was like, maybe I'll settle for mission control. So I looked up, when it was time to start applying to colleges, I looked at what types of degrees those people had. And they were mostly engineers. So I didn't really know what engineers did, but I decided that that's what I was going to try to do. So that's kind of the basics of how I got into it.
Nice. Yeah, when I was younger, obviously, I think everybody was into space, 80s, 90s with the space shuttle and everything.
Oh, yeah.
My dad grew up during the Apollo era, and he was just fascinated with it. He had all these old school reports of the Saturn V rocket and all that stuff. But in my mind, I was going to go to the Air Force Academy and then go fly fighter jets and then go fly the space shuttle. And then I graduated in 2009. And by then they had already announced that, retiring the space shuttle and all that stuff. I'm like, well, that's not going to work.
Well, I was going to say I graduated high school in 2010, and I heard from everybody that NASA had been shut down because in North Dakota, or at least like the people I was surrounded by, they thought when they heard that the space shuttle program was ending, they thought that meant NASA was shutting down. And so like same story, like everybody told me like that will never happen. Like you need to choose a different dream. But lo and behold, I found a way.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think people focus on the S in NASA and forget about all the other letters of the of the acronym, especially the aeronautic side. So as you went along your journey, I found you on Instagram, and I love a lot of the stuff that you've been posting on there, and it seems to really encourage people to get into the field. What encouraged you to first start sharing that journey online?
I think it was in college because I went to college. Well, so I have very supportive parents. They've always, like, any goal I've ever had, they've said, okay, you can do it if you put your mind to it. And so when I got to college, I was not prepared for the fact that I would be such a minority. Like, I did not know that it wasn't a common career field for women to go into engineering. And so I felt pretty isolated at times. There were a lot of times where I felt like I was told, you don't look like an engineer, you don't act like an engineer, you don't talk whatever like an engineer. So I really wanted to build a community for especially women, but I mean, I really uh, share my content for everyone to get interested in it. In the STEM fields, but particularly women because we are such a minority. And so I really wanted to build a community and a community that I didn't always feel like I had going through the process. And I didn't always feel like I had people who looked like me to look up to. So that's really why I decided to start sharing. And then, like we kind of talked about in the I guess probably before we started recording, but there's a lot of career fields that you just don't know about until you hear about them some way or see in a book or on TV, and then you're like, "Well, shoot, like, I missed the boat on that." So I wanted to share, about my journey for that reason too.
Yeah, very cool. Was that like an instant did people pick up on that right away, or did it take you a long time before a following started to form?
Um, I don't know about a long time, but I feel like people were really fascinated by sometimes, like, an organization like NASA, you see the astronauts and they're the face of NASA, but you don't, like, see the process of how they got to being these, like, superhuman people. And so for me, it felt like I was just a normal person who worked really hard and got lucky and had this really cool, interesting career that not many people maybe get to have. And so I felt like that's probably what helped me reach more people is just like sharing this very unique aspect of NASA and it was the aviation side that people maybe didn't necessarily realize was there.
Sure. Yeah, I think when I found you, it was around the time you were going to test pilot school. I started
Okay.
seeing some of the posts around that, and at first, I thought it was, military related just
Uh-huh.
because that's what I think most people think of when they think of test pilot school. But it was really interesting to see the civilian side of it and kinda your process as you went through that. And we'll get into that later, but I wanna start with NASA 'cause, I think I read that you got an internship was it your 2nd year of college at NASA?
Yeah, I think it was my second year. I had interned at GE Aviation. My school required co-ops, which at first I saw as like a roadblock to getting to my ultimate dream of getting a full-time job at NASA. But it ended up being such a godsend that I had to do the co-ops because that's how I ultimately got my foot in the door there. So yeah, my first internship was at GE Aviation and I was working on like the fan and booster team, so the front part of an aircraft engine on that team. And then I was like, okay, well, this is cool, but I want to work on like the whole airplane, not just part of an engine. And that's where I really learned that I was a big picture person. So from there, I kind of talked to some people and found out that there was a flight test facility for the aircraft engines. So that's how I actually made my way first out to California because it's just in Victorville, like I don't know, not too far from here. I flew over it today. And I got in there, and then by that time, I had kind of I emailed every NASA center my resume, and I was like, "Hey, I really wanna work here. Here's my resume." And, I think doing that was kind of, like, setting myself apart as opposed to just going through an online job application process. And, lucky enough, they eventually, Johnson Space Center replied and, interviewed me, and there's, like, more to the story, but that's the very basics of it, and, that's how I kinda got my foot in the door there, so
Yeah. What was that first internship like? Did it feel like, fish in a big pond kinda
I
feeling or
not really, but it felt, like, so like I was in the place I was meant to be, like, I felt so, like everything had fallen into place so perfectly, and it was, like, everything I had dreamed it would be. It was such a, like, awesome hands-on experience. There were women in leadership roles, and, uh, it was a very encouraging place to be. And I had the first internship there was with they're a group that sits on console and mission control, and they teach the astronauts how to fix things like the toilet and different other pieces of hardware on the space station. And so it was like a really cool experience to get hands on, while also like I don't know, I was, like, surrounded by astronauts. It was so surreal for me coming from North Dakota. I was like, "These people are superheroes, and here they are, like, talking to me." So it was pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that is very cool. As you went through the internships, when did it seem like, this could really be a career? Like, this isn't just a college gig. I could do this long term.
Well, that was the really cool thing about their, Pathways intern program is that you were guaranteed 3 internships with them, and then you're pretty much because you were already, like, in as a civil servant, it's one of the few ways to get your foot in the door as a civil servant, and, as a result, you were pretty much not 100% guaranteed a job after graduation, but you were highly likely to get a job. So like it was pretty cool. I got to try 3 different, I think, yeah, 3 different places, just to kind of see where I fit best within the organization. So
Sure. What was your favorite out of the spots that you interned at?
well, that's how I ended up getting into aircraft operations, where I ultimately got my full-time job offer. I really couldn't pick a spot. I mean, I loved the team that did the mission control stuff. I thought that that was, like, so cool. You got to talk on a headset, sit in mission control, train, you were so like, my family is huge on lifelong learning, and so I felt like I was learning a lot of new stuff, and I got to you would eventually train astronauts. So, I thought that was pretty interesting, but also, like, the aircraft operations side was so cool because even as an intern, they let me fly on the airplanes, and that's why I ultimately decided to go there was I saw how hands-on it was, and, the opportunity to fly really intrigued me, and so that's ultimately why I ended up there.
Yeah, let's dig more into that because that's the first A in NASA that I think people forget about is,
Yeah.
it actually comes before the space part.
Mhm.
They're
That's
they're
true.
an aeronautic organization. So,
Yeah.
what does NASA do on the aviation aeronautical side?
Well, they do a lot of things.
I'm on the journey to 1,000 subscribers, and you can help me get there. If you like listening to the AirPod, hit subscribe on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify. Now back to the episode.
But, particularly Johnson Space Center, they have about 20 aircraft, and their main mission is to train the astronauts for what they call spaceflight readiness training, and that's in the T-38 aircraft. They're still flying the same T-38s that they flew to train for the Apollo missions, and, so that's pretty cool, and that's why you're always surrounded by astronauts, and then, secondarily, they do airborne science. So we had 2 Gulfstream aircraft, a G3 and a G5, that were airborne science platforms. And then they had a Super Guppy, which is like a huge cargo aircraft. And they could like transport parts of the space station in that vehicle. And then they had WB-57s, which were high altitude weather reconnaissance type aircraft, but they used them for airborne science as well. And so the aircraft I worked on primarily were the, Gulfstream aircraft.
Very cool. Yeah, a little different setup, I imagine, than a traditional Gulfstream that, is
Yes.
used as a business jet.
Yeah, so they basically I mean, not entirely, but they gutted them and well, one of them had big holes cut in the bottom, and that's what I mostly worked on as an engineer was, they had inch and a half thick fused silica glass that we put over the in these holes in the floor, and we could mount instruments above them and then look down on our Earth and collect, airborne science data, like, they could see how snow was changing, and different stuff like that. I wasn't the scientist, I was the engineer helping install the payloads, but that was cool. And then the other thing we would do with those airplanes actually, so it looked more like a business aircraft in that configuration, was we transported astronauts. Um, Honestly, all around the world, but for we transported them for their training and then also for launches to the space station as well.
Okay. And was this in the era when we were still using Russian, rockets to get to the space station?
Yeah, yeah. In 2020, I was on the first ever NASA aircraft to land in Kazakhstan because during COVID, they allowed us to land there. We had to bring over some I don't think we brought the astronauts, but we did bring some other people and transported important people and, ultimately astronauts. But yeah, I got to see a launch from Kazakhstan, which was pretty remarkable.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
That's probably a very small list of people that have been able to do that.
Yeah.
Did they still have the shuttle trainer Gulfstream when you were
Mm.
there?
Nope, I can't remember what year. I assume they retired those around 2010, 2011 when they stopped flying the space shuttle, but no,
Yeah,
they were all by that point, I think in museums or wherever they
gotcha.
ended up. I think there might be one out here at Edwards Air Force Base actually, but,
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, I guess for people that don't know, was it modified Gulfstream? Was it a 2 or a 3
I believe it
that
was
they
a
would
G2, yeah.
yeah, and, to simulate the approach path of the space shuttle, they would go I think only the main gear could come out, and then they could put the thrust reversers out in flight
Mhm.
and have that, like anyway, I got to hear Fred Hayes speak one time, and he
Oh,
talked
cool.
about, the glider model of the shuttle and all that stuff, and his first flight on that. And again, for those that don't know, he was on Apollo 13, and he actually said his first landing on the glider shuttle was the scariest moment of his career because the flight computer, he was doing little tiny inputs, and it's all fly by wire, very
Uh-huh.
early fly by wire. And he said that the flight computer actually locked him out when he was almost to the
Oh
runway
my
because it just
gosh, I did not know
overloaded.
that. Oh my gosh.
So
Yeah,
it was cool to hear him talk about that.
I'm sure. Yeah, that's amazing. It would have been cool to fly on that aircraft though, because the woman who trained me for my position as a flight science officer, she used to fly on as in the same kind of role, like a flight engineer on the G2, the shuttle trainer.
Mhm.
So that would have been quite the experience for sure.
Yeah. While you were there, what was your favorite project that you worked on?
I
Or
think
most impactful, I guess?
probably the craziest, most impactful, project that actually, won me my team, Silver Achievement Medal, which is a pretty prestigious award at NASA, was well, there are so many good projects, oh my gosh, but this one was in, I believe it was also 2020. I did some crazy travel in 2020. I flew to Australia by way of crazy cool stops. We stopped in Wake Island to get fuel, and we stopped in Guam and Hawaii and all kinds of stuff. But we got to Australia, had to quarantine for, I think it was, yeah, 2 weeks in a hotel. That was wild. And then we got out of quarantine and got the aircraft ready to go. We had two NASA aircraft. I think the other one was from Langley, and, we basically we had replaced the cabin windows with, like, a special cast acrylic, that was also, like, an optical grade for some cameras to be mounted behind them, and then we, basically intercepted the high-speed atmospheric reentry of the Hayabusa 2 capsule. It had part of an asteroid, and the Japanese had sent it to space like 10 years before, and it just so happened to be coming back to Earth during COVID. So we had to do all these crazy precautions in order to make that mission happen. But I was gone for about a month in Australia. So that was crazy. And seeing it come back like from the aircraft, we were like, it was crazy. It was so cool.
What did that look
So
like coming back in?
like, kinda like an asteroid, I guess,
Okay.
or like a shooting star, it was very bright and had a plasma tail on it, and, it burned up pretty quickly, but it was pretty cool to see.
What was the most surprising part about the culture at NASA when you got there?
I was surprised by how many women were in leadership roles, and I was surprised by how many young people were on my team, actually. I was in a smaller team just because there's, like, Maine Johnson Space Center, and then we were on, like, an old air reserve base called Ellington Field. So I was like a little bit secluded from the main campus. Um, Granted, I still had to go over there for certain things, but it was so awesome. All the responsibility I was given as a young person to do like really cool projects. Like I was able to be a part of the project cycle from start to finish as an engineer. We were assigned the project. We worked to do all the requirements definition, design reviews, airworthiness reviews, install stuff on the aircraft, do a flight readiness review or whatever, and then go and actually fly the mission, as aircrew. That was, like, pretty remarkable, and yeah, just to be a part of that whole entire process and as a young person in my 20s was so cool.
Yeah.
It's still something I look so fondly on, so.
Is that full life cycle involvement pretty rare in engineering in general?
It's hard for me to say because I've only really worked at, like, NASA and now another company, other than for internships. I would say it probably is only because for, like, larger, aerospace companies, you're generally responsible for much narrower things. Like right now, I'm in flight test or whatever, or testing, but there's other people who are like just discipline engineers. They're responsible for one small system, whereas like at NASA, I got to see so much, I guess.
Yeah.
So it was kind of unique in that way.
Yeah. After my space shuttle dreams died, I started college in aerospace engineering. And in my mind, I was like, oh, I'm going to design a whole airplane. And then I realized, like, oh, no, there's
Yeah,
somebody that works
exactly.
on like the brake calipers and somebody that works on the rivets and like whatever. I'm like, no,
Yeah.
I don't want to do this.
Well, and I think that's why I liked it so much. It was so like it was it wasn't so in the weeds engineering. It was more like big picture, and that's like really what I enjoy doing. And it's not like full like systems engineering or anything like that where it's so high level, but it was yeah, I think it was a good mix of like in the weeds but not like in the weeds.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it had a mix of operational too.
With kind of the rise of SpaceX, Blue Origin, some of these other commercial space companies, and we hear about NASA budget cuts all the time. It seems like they're the first ones on the chopping block when the money gets tight. Um, have you seen, or do you think there's a lot of attrition of really talented engineers and individuals that maybe otherwise would have been at NASA that are now going to these commercial companies?
Yeah, honestly, I'm really disappointed at, I guess, just the cavalier nature of how the government civilians have been treated through the past few years. I think that we really easily, as government employees, get caught up in the crossfire of politics, and I don't think we realize in the moment, like, how damaging that can be to the future of our, like, industry. Like, I think we need really smart, talented people um, in the commercial industry, but I think we also need them in government because I think that it fills a really important need of, like as a like, for instance, a NASA employee, well, as NASA as an organization, like, you just inherently can't take the same risks that you can at a company like Blue Origin or SpaceX because you have, the taxpayer to answer to, but
Hmm.
as a result, I I don't wanna say you're, like, under more rigor in terms of safety, but, like, there's just different it's just different, and, I wish that we would be a little more judicious about how we treat, government civilians, I guess, in terms of, like in general, you're not making the same salary as you would at a private company, so, like, you have to do something to keep them there, and,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of, like, leadership or, like, professional development opportunities as a government employee that do kind of fill the gap of, like, maybe you're not paid as much, but you have a lot of opportunity, and there's, like, really unique, cool, projects, but, yeah, it's just an interesting dynamic, I think,
Yeah.
having to the furloughs and all that, I
And
dealt with that.
And like we talked about, NASA's not just space. And I
Yeah.
hear it from a lot of people every time that the budget cuts come down. It's like, well, we don't need to go to the moon, or we don't need to go to Mars, or we don't need to spend money on blah, blah, blah. But all the research that's done by NASA in a number of fields, not just aeronautics. I mean, there's um, like agricultural research and
Uh-huh, uh,
weather research and all this stuff that's integral. I mean, you look at just the aviation industry and commercial aviation in particular, like the weather is
uh-huh.
so crucial to having decent. We've seen so many interruptions this past week because weather across the southeast and most of the U.S. was just a nightmare, and it's like all these flights are getting delayed, and you know, I don't really know where I was going with that, other
Well,
than NASA is
well,
important beyond the space launches.
yeah, the list goes on and on. I mean, they're doing research right now on the supersonic booms with the X-59 aircraft. They enable a lot of technology. I think SpaceX has done remarkable things, but if you look at how they were able to sustain through, like, times in which there was no market for what they were doing. Like, NASA is the reason they are where they are. I don't wanna say they're the only reason. They're not the only reason they are where they are today, but they ultimately probably wouldn't have succeeded as quickly as they have, or if at all, if it weren't for the large amount of dollars and, other resources that NASA provided in the early days because, um I mean, they gave them the commercial crew, contract and many other contracts and all that. So I think the government needs, these commercial companies and the reverse is true as well, so.
Yeah, it's like the phrase, standing on the back of giants. All
Mhm.
the NASA research through 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s that allowed SpaceX and Blue Origin and these other companies to just have their starting line had moved so much further forward because they weren't having to figure it all out from scratch.
Just a note that, none of what I said is, me speaking on behalf of NASA or the government or anything like that. It's a previous employer of mine, and these are all my personal opinions.
NASA led to test pilot school, right? And
Yeah.
this is the one I was really interested in. As I mentioned, when I saw test pilot school, I think the first thing that came to my mind for sure is military. I think historically that's been probably the biggest volume of test pilots. A lot of, again, early astronauts that went into the NASA program were test pilots or military guys that went through test pilot school. What what is the National Test Pilot School, and then what does that look like going in as a civilian?
Yeah, so I first found out about test pilot school because of NASA, because they used to send, at least Johnson Space Center used to send like one engineer every 4 years because they had like some agreements with the Naval Test Pilot School. And ultimately, my boss said that we weren't going to be doing that anymore. They didn't see the benefit quite as much, and they wanted to send like, maybe have one class come and teach all the engineers rather than have one single person go and get this, like, $1,000,000 education, and then bring back what they had learned. And so, I've really struggled with, I didn't like that answer ultimately because I wanted to go to test pilot school myself, and, my coworker who had been, like he had just gone or was, I think he had just come back from test pilot school, and he had heard that the National Test Pilot School had a fellowship and the application was open. So I decided to apply. It was for a flight test engineer because both pilots and we can talk more about that, but pilots and engineers both go to test pilot school. It's a common misconception. And so I applied and got in, and it was honestly the hardest decision I've had to make was leaving behind what I felt was my dream job and I was only there for at NASA for like 4 years, and it felt like I can't believe I'm leaving this behind after only 4 years. Like I didn't feel ready, but I also felt like if I didn't take the opportunity, it would pass me by, and so I had to take it. So the military test pilot schools only have so much room to take foreign military. So there's only like 7 or 9 like internationally like recognized test pilot schools, and the National Test Pilot School in California is one of them. And, they fill that need. They take a lot of foreign military students and train them on how to test airplanes and spacecraft and everything else. And, so they had a scholarship program, for flight test engineers, and, they take usually 2 per year. And, so it's the same as like the military test pilot schools, it's just a civilian nonprofit school instead.
Mhm. A and then maybe, I guess, what does a test pilot or test pilot engineer do today? Because again, in my mind, I'm thinking, 1950s, 60s, like we built this plane, we think it's going to work, get in it and see if it works, which, with modern CAD and simulations, all that stuff, not, we pretty much know the plane's going to fly. So what does being a test pilot and a test pilot engineer look like today?
So that's what's funny is, like, you look at Top Gun 2, and they make it look like it's just this, like, haphazard thing. You get in an airplane, and you fly it like you're a cowboy, but it's a lot more calculated than that. So most of what you're doing as a flight tester is spending your time planning the test. So, like, if you look at any commercial aircraft that's flying today, it went through a rigorous flight test program. So, you have a brand new aircraft and you need to figure out all kinds of things about like rotation speed, like what speed you have to rotate at in order to not have a multitude of issues upon taking off and making sure it can actually lift off the runway, and how long it needs to have for a runway to take off safely. So that's just one small part of flight test, is like civil certification. But ultimately in test pilot school, you're learning how to test the airplanes, and there are tried and true, like back in those days, they developed what we call flight test techniques. And I'm learning as an engineer or a pilot in test pilot school all about how to execute those flight test techniques. So I'm learning not only the very rigorous engineering technical background about aerodynamics and how airplanes work and performance and handling qualities, flying qualities. I'm learning all that, but then I'm also learning how to actually execute that in the air, to make sure that I'm testing appropriately the aircraft and how it's going to fly, its flying qualities, and how it's going to handle, how it's going to feel when I'm flying it, and that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Cool. Yeah, it
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
So it opens career opportunities, I guess, for any aircraft manufacturer, right? They pretty much all have to go through some form of testing like that?
Yeah, like Airbus, Boeing, they all have a flight test whole department whose job is to do all that, and they do it in hand with the FAA
Hmm, 'kay.
or other organization. If you're in Europe, it's EASA. That's why, so the
Yeah,
interesting thing about the National Test Pilot School, they have all these foreign military, so as a result, they have in Europe, the equivalent of the FAA is EASA, and they require you to have gone to test pilot school in order to execute flight test. So, like for instance, Airbus Germany will send over pilots and engineers to get this certification, so that they can ultimately perform flight test over there.
gotcha. And you said they handle a lot of foreign military pilots and I presume engineers too that come
Mhm.
in and go through the school. Is there any difference in the curriculum between a military student and a civilian student going through the program?
Nope. The only difference is that the National Test Pilot School is unique in that they have a master's only program. So we'll have students coming and going that are just getting a master's degree. Um, but they'll do the academic parts, but they won't do any of the flying. So it's like more cost effective. But, no, there's no difference between my military counterparts and me going through the full year-long professional course. We all did all of the things, and in fact, the pilots and engineers are both in class together doing the exact same thing because, the whole point is that pilots and engineers need to speak the same exact language in because they work so closely hand in hand in industry. So, we're learning how to speak the same language, and that's why me as a engineer who doesn't actually at the time didn't know how to fly airplanes, they still let me fly them with, of course, an instructor, because I need to know if the pilot's telling me what they're seeing and feeling, I need to know exactly what they're talking about because I've seen it too.
Yeah. I really like this point because I've had a lot of comments from people on my various clips and videos, and I've heard it my entire life too. It's like, well, the engineers don't understand what the pilot has to do.
Nah.
The
Yeah.
engineers, oh, like they're not pilots. They why did they design it this way? Blah blah blah. But when you go through a program like that, like you said, one, you're actually flying the plane in some cases, and two, you're right there with the pilot. You guys are learning the same thing side by side. So I think that's very important for people to hear.
And you have a little more empathy for the fact that, like, if the pilot's having a hard time, like, getting on condition, like, I need them at this speed, at this altitude in order to collect this data I need, it makes me a lot more understanding when they can't get on condition. I'm like, "Okay, I see, like, you're dealing with this and that and the other thing, and now, like, I'm not I understand."
Yeah,
And they understand equally why because of the math and the academic background, they understand why exactly I need them at that test point.
sure.
So it's just, yeah, we better understand each other.
Yeah. Uh, what are you learning through that year-long process?
I am learning how to I'm learning how to problem solve and how to, like, well, they always say, like, you're keeping yourself alive in, like, a very dangerous situation. Like, you learn how to, like, make really good decisions under pressure, I guess I would say.
Okay.
Um, because and also how to be efficient with tests, because if you're in, like, an aircraft that has an hour's worth of fuel, you have to be very efficient. So you learn that. You learn a lot about test integrity, like, you're gonna have program managers who are worried about cost and schedule, and, aren't gonna like they always say, like, you have to be able to call somebody's baby ugly. So you're telling you're learning how to, like, be honest about what you saw, even if it's not the answer that somebody else wants.
Sure.
So test integrity in that sense, and then, yeah, like, making good sound decisions in the face of, like, risky environments, I guess. I don't know if that's really the best way to put it, but, yeah, I'm at a loss for, like, how exactly to say it.
No, it makes sense. And being efficient with the test too. You mentioned that you don't want to really have the cost consideration, but if you go to private sector like that, there's always the cost consideration. So I think it's important that that piece is talked about too, because nobody wants to go up. Some of those aircraft are, I'm sure thousands and thousands of dollars an hour to operate,
Mhm, mhm.
and you go up and you can't get the test done that you want to get done, have to come back and do it again another day. That's
Yeah.
hurts the bottom line.
Well, and you're almost always at flight test at the end of like, closer to the end of, like, the whole project life cycle again. You're always behind, schedule and over budget. So, you're getting that pressure of, like, doing more with less, or somebody wanting to cut out flight test altogether, and you have to be able to explain why it's so important.
Yeah,
Because you have to verify the system ultimately in the air. There's only so much that models can do, and also flight test validates your models also.
sure.
So
Yeah, I mean, you see it with like the modern airliners now. The delays in some of these programs, 777X has been in development. It's like 10 years of developing what is effectively a new generation of an aircraft that already existed. And I think I just saw they're going into like their fourth stage of flight testing or something. But
yeah.
um, it's just crazy. I went to the Boeing factory in 2017, I think, and they were building, um, 001 and 002 of the 777X,
Wow.
and I got to see them on the factory floor, and it's like, we're
That's awesome.
still not certified.
Yeah,
It's kinda
yeah, it's
wild.
crazy. It's crazy how long it can take to develop and, get into service a brand new aircraft like that, yeah.
So you talked about what you're learning in test pilot school. What types of flying were you doing? Because I saw a variety of different aircraft that you were in. T2 Buckeye was a cool one that I
Yeah.
saw. The different types of aircraft you're flying and what you're doing on those flights.
Well, like, a lot of um the general aviation aircraft we would use for, like, systems testing. Like, we had a course on GPS and, EOIR, like, electro-optical infrared cameras, uh, just a bunch of different classes, and then we had the performance and flying qualities, and usually we would do, in general, more jets for that type of coursework, because you're doing, like, jet cruise performance, climb performance, turn performance, and then, of course, we got a capstone project at the end of it all, and that's when I got to fly the T2 Buckeye, which was really cool because my father-in-law got to fly that in naval pilot training back in the day. So it felt like really cool that I got to, like, randomly got put on that. But but yeah, so it just depends what you're learning how to do, but, like, you would use a jet. We did jets for spin training, like, spin it's like you're trying to determine how susceptible an aircraft is to spinning,
Okay,
based on its characteristics once it starts to spin, but
sure.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Did that feel like a big step out of your comfort zone coming from the engineering side to be in the air doing that I mean, you had flown on the Gulfstreams at NASA, but now you're intentionally putting aircraft in some cases out of control.
Yeah, it was I feel like the most nerve-wracking, like, the most anticipated, but also most nerve-wracking was flying in a jet, like a two-seat jet for the first time, um, because I had wanted to do that for so long, and there were opportunities for me to fly the T-38 at NASA, but I ultimately it's a long story, but I ultimately did not ever do that, and so the school eventually I got to fly a T-38 at, test pilot school, so it felt like it was a long time coming, but it was also, like, nerve-wracking because it's, like, all this new experience all at once, so, like, you're wearing a G suit, you have a helmet and a mask and, like, and it's tiny, and it's like, this is all so new, and then, if the pilot knows it's your first time, they're probably gonna try to make you sick, so so you're like, "Try not to barf," and, like, it was fun, but I remember just, like, lining up to take off and, like, in my mind being like, "Holy cow, I could pinch myself. This is so surreal that this is my life right now. I've wanted this for so long, and I can't believe this is actually happening." Especially as a civilian, being able to do this, like, I always say when people ask me, "What's the coolest, like, most surreal thing you've gotten to do?" It's like, literally, somebody let me fly a military jet with, no pilot's license as a civilian, like,
Yeah,
where does that happen?
that's
Like,
pretty
pretty cool.
awesome. Yeah.
So,
Was it like a big kick in the pants to get inside like a T-38 that's got afterburners and just go up
that
like a
was awesome.
rocket ship? Yeah.
Even that it felt so fast. I don't know if you saw me from the side like, from outside the aircraft, you'd probably be like, "That's not that fast," but it felt really cool.
What was the most interesting flight you went on or project you did during that training?
I think the capstone project, I mean, flying a T-2 Buckeye was pretty cool, and then also just it was rewarding because, I worked with another test pilot student. Him and I were on a team. He was from the UK, which was pretty cool, and, we got to plan out the entire test, go and execute it without any help really, and then, report on it, and it's like this huge culmination of everything we've learned. So that just felt obviously very rewarding to get to, like, put everything I had learned into one report and, do ultimately what I would do in industry
Sure.
as a flight test engineer.
Once you get into industry in that field, are those test parameters, are you setting those? Are engineers ahead of you in the design process setting those? Like if Boeing's they got the 777X and the engineers that designed it originally and they're passing it off to the test flight engineers, are they saying we need to see this, this, and this?
I think it ultimately depends on the company, but generally, you would have, like, a whole team that kinda comes together. You'd have the discipline engineers, the flight test team, like, flight test engineers, all kinda collaborating to determine um what data products you're gonna need to validate the system. It's not just, like, one person, but, yeah, you would work together to come up with, like, a test matrix of everything you need to get, and then also, like, the whole test plan, but, yeah.
Would you say it's common to go through a flight test and find something that was unexpected?
I think that's probably pretty common. I mean, it's gonna be pretty hard to, like, have 100%, like, accurate models, and then, just there's always gonna be something I think that's unforeseen that you didn't expect. But, like, I think it's pretty common in this industry to have, at the end of it all, have a debrief, just like you would from a flight, have a debrief and, like, kinda talk through the lessons learned as well.
Sure.
So,
Cool.
yeah.
What was the biggest challenge you faced in test pilot school?
Well, there were a couple women, but I was the only girl in my entire graduating class. That was interesting. I think I don't necessarily feel like I was treated differently by any of my classmates because I was a woman. So it wasn't necessarily like a huge challenge. It was just very interesting. And then I think just because it was such a diverse, like culturally diverse class, I think it was really interesting to have like people from all over the world, different cultures, different experiences, some military, some civilian. I just think that was really unique, interesting, but also at times challenging. You're dealing with a lot of different personalities and cultural expectations. Um, so just a cool, interesting experience from that perspective.
Yeah, the cultural piece is interesting to me because I know a lot of guys that fly internationally and they talk about just how different, even on the commercial side, international pilots and air traffic controllers and stuff. I mean, aviation's supposed to be standardized across the world,
Mhm.
right? But the reality is it's not. And
Yeah, yeah.
in the US, I think it's, if anything, a little more lax than it is in other places. And, the less standard phraseology, and people can get away with a little more just because we're, historically cowboys. it's, the
Yeah, that's
US is,
funny.
is rebels.
Yeah, it's funny because when I started, like, training, like, to get my pilot's certificate, it's funny because my instructor was, like, looking at me really weird because I kept saying "copy" instead of, like, "Roger," and I did not realize that there are literally books with, like, actually accepted terms, and, like, "copy" is not one of them, but it's a very common term for engineers to use, is to say "copy."
Mm, sure.
So,
Yeah.
just interesting little things, but not that it's a big deal, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, US pilots get a lot of crap for not ever saying "Mayday" if there's an emergency.
Oh.
It's everybody, I always see, like, they post the videos online of there's some emergency and they have the ATC recording, and they're like, "Why don't you just say Mayday? Like, I'm declaring an emergency. Just say Mayday."
Yes, that literally happened, when I was new in test pilot school. We went on a night flight and ended up hitting really bad low-level wind shear and turbulence, and we decided we needed to go back to return to base, and I was sitting next to a German, and in front were 2 Australians flying the plane, and we had agreed, like, "Knock it off" is a term you use in flight test to, like, we need to stop, we're in a something's unsafe. And they never said knock it off, they said, "We're gonna cut it away." And to me, I had hung out with enough Australians that I could understand completely. The German guy next to me did not understand what was going on, he just kept proceeding with the test, and it was a pretty scary situation. We were not doing it was not good. But anyway, we get on the ground and he just kept going, "I don't understand, but you never said knock it off." I was like I'm like, "Yeah, because cut it away means, like, cut it away, like, we're going back." But it was
Precision
funny,
of
like
language.
yeah, I'm glad we all made it out okay so we could laugh about it now, but, like, it was kinda a good example of, like, you can't just use whatever words you want because people won't understand.
Sure. That's
But,
funny.
yeah.
I think STEM as a term has gained a lot of popularity lately, and I think, I hope at least, that the fields within it are gaining popularity too. I definitely see it more on the technology side, but engineering is one that I don't have numbers on it. I don't know if that's increasing or decreasing, but how do we encourage younger generations to get into these STEM professions?
I think, again, that's part of why I so badly wanted to share, like, what I do at work because you might imagine from a movie or like from wherever you see wherever you see it, you might think an engineer is somebody who sits at a desk and crunches numbers all day, and I don't think that's particularly appealing to maybe many people.
That was me.
Or
I don't
yeah.
wanna design the little screw and cat.
Yes, exactly. So I think it's cool to like show people how hands-on and cool and awesome your career can be as an engineer. But I think that one major blocker is that engineering and other STEM fields are seen as so challenging because the academic process of getting to the end goal of a job is so it is really scary and challenging, and I think it might scare a lot of people away. And so I wish there was a way to like make it, I don't know, more fun. Like I felt like my academic process of getting through undergrad was so challenging, and I almost felt like it was more challenging than it necessarily needed to be. I think you do need to learn how to solve problems and it needs to be rigorous in some ways, but I felt like it was so like the environment was so intimidating that it didn't need to be that way. And so I think if we show people like the hard work is worth it by showing them these career fields and like the day to day, I think that that could be really helpful.
Yeah. You did mechanical and aeronautical engineering, right?
Yeah, I did well, my undergrad was mechanical with an aerospace focus, and then my master's was in aerospace engineering.
Okay. Was
Yeah.
there one that was more challenging than the other? I mean, obviously, master's program, I would imagine just being a master's program is challenging enough, but
It was
between the 2
challenging, yeah.
disciplines.
I think the master's was challenging in its own way. I think I went to Georgia Tech, and it's known for being rigorous, and, it was challenging. I learned how to really, like, learn independently in a way. I think that's part of what a master's degree program isn't designed to do, but I honestly thought the most challenging thing about undergrad was the professors who had a very opinionated view of what an engineer looked like and needed to act like, and, like, I remember being told, um yeah, like, I struggled at I think it was, like, mechanics and materials or some course like that, and I remember being told, like, "Yeah, something's not clicking up here, you should just change your major to something else, something easier," and I'm like, if I had listened to that, I would never have ended up where I am today, and I think that I don't think those, like, pieces of feedback are useful. I
Yeah.
don't know why anyone would, like, use that to, like as a piece of advice for someone, but,
Uh, also, as
yeah.
if you're the only person that's ever struggled through
I
any type of
know,
college curriculum. That's insane.
and if any parent has ever taught their kids something, it's that you don't give up when something is hard, so I don't understand why that was, like, even a thought, but, I forgot what the question was. I got all on my soapbox about
Just no, if either mechanical or
Oh,
aerospace
which one's
engineering
harder?
were more difficult.
Oh, I guess I was just trying to say that I think the environment is what made it hard, and being one of so few women, but I think mechanical engineering is, like, a good basis because you can use it to go into any career field within engineering, like, it's so broad, I think it's really useful. Um, I don't know if I'd ever say anything one is harder than the other or anything, I think there are just particular subjects that every person is gonna find harder than others, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
I remember I have a buddy, he's a Air Force pilot now, he flies,
Mhm.
HH-60s,
Oh,
but,
cool.
he did aerospace engineering when we were at, University of Florida together, and he was talking about some of the like, fluid dynamics and all this other stuff
Oh,
where I'm
yeah.
just like, you know, that hurts my brain, but
I
yeah,
thought dynamics was really hard, like, how things move. I don't know. I don't even honestly remember what that class was about, it was so hard. It was like a weed out course, it was 5 credits, and I was like, "This is so unfair." Like, I think that professor probably told me to change my major too. He told me I didn't understand basic math is what he told me, and I cried in his office, and he did not like that, but
goodness. Well, maybe
oh
they're
well.
just trying to make sure you're tough enough to make
Yeah,
it, but I
yeah.
think there's better ways to go about it. I talked about a little bit how, with computer modeling and all the tools that we have now, the test pilot side of things obviously is still very important, but do you think we ever get to a point where the computer modeling is so good that test pilots as we know them now aren't really necessary or as necessary? Or do you think there's always just real world uncertainties that we'll never be able to know?
I really wanted to immediately say, "No, I don't think we'll ever get there," but I think there are certain things like a computer can much more easily put a very clean input into an aircraft than a human can. It's just how it works. Like, a computer can do it much like, if you're gonna do a step input on an airplane, I think a computer can do that better than a human. However, I think that there are certain like things like with aerodynamics, for instance, that we just like don't know how to model. Like that's I think it's just there's no way around it. And I think that in the end, you're always gonna have to validate the system in the flight environment. I think that that will always be true. And I could be wrong, but that's my opinion.
If somebody wanted to follow in your path to get, to NASA or to test pilot school, do you think there's an easier route, a harder route, or it's just, put in all the applications you can, make the connections that you can make and go that way?
I don't know that people realize how important uh, little things are in order to set yourself apart. Like, I don't know where I got the idea that I should Google uh, points of contact at every NASA center and email them my resume. I don't know where I got that crazy idea, but I think my outcome would have been a lot different if I had just gone onto the NASA website and sent my resume into the application process and been in there with thousands of other people. I think people underestimate how big of an impact that can have. Like, it shows that you have the initiative and the passion to, like, reach out. I don't think people do that as often as maybe they should. So, I think that I would highly recommend that. Like, if you can talk to a human being and convey your passion, I think that can get you pretty far.
Yeah. You've mentioned a couple times how sometimes you feel like you're the only woman in the room in some of these career fields.
Yeah.
If there's other young women that are wanting to chase down that pathway too, are there organizations or groups that you recommend that they join that might make them feel a little less alone?
Yeah. I think there are lots of great organizations. There's Women in Aviation, Society of Women Engineers. There's a group called I think it's called the 99s. They're female pilots. Any organization like that, I think, really will help build a sense of community for any young woman out there. And I think also, like, it's important to also surround yourself with people who don't look like you. Like, I had plenty of, men in my life who were advocates for me and allies and, really spoke up for me in situations where maybe my voice wasn't heard or I wasn't in the room and they advocated for me. So I think that can be equally important too.
Yeah. Strength through diversity. I like
Mhm,
it
that's right. Yeah, we build the best teams when we, have diverse teams and different thoughts and
for sure.
experiences and stuff like that, so, yeah.
Yeah. Is there one habit or mindset that you think made the biggest difference in your journey?
Um, I think that, one of the things I'm most proud of about myself is that I have a really strong sense of discipline, and I always relate that to, like, the fact that I started running marathons. I think that the thing I like most about running marathons is the training and the discipline that training for a marathon requires, and I think that that carries through for, like, human space flight. You have to have discipline in following your flight rules that you have in place and all the safety precautions in order to keep people safe. It carries through with flight test and the test discipline that we talk about in order to, again, keep you and your crew members safe, and it also is true in, like, having discipline in studying as a student or, like, chasing your career goals. I think that's discipline in your life can be really important and a useful tool.
Mhm. And then finally, where can people find you?
I have a website that is, theplanekate.com, and then all my social media handles. Instagram is where I mostly post, but it's all The Plain Kate.
Great. Kate, thank you so much.
Yeah,
That was
thank you. It
awesome.
was fun.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for listening. If you want to hear more from Kate, the link to her stuff is down below. If you want to hear more from aviation professionals just like Kate, you can subscribe to the Airpod on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. I will see you right back here on the Airpod.